They can appear out of nowhere, with explosive bursts of spray like sudden gunfire. These are killer whales, creatures full of surprises. What manner of animal is this? A mammal like ourselves, with one of the largest brains known to science. We've only begun to understand this complex mind. Each killer whale is linked with others in a fascinating symphony of underwater sound. With one another, they are affectionate and loyal unto death. But to other species, they are death itself. In our time, killer whales have come to the world of man. They have been the cause of joy and anguish, but always they have been our friends. Visit now with beautiful aliens from the deep. This is the story of killer whales. They have been called wolves of the sea, mysterious predators guided by uncanny intelligence. They were once thought to be among the most dangerous creatures on Earth. Until recently, little more was known about Orcinus orca, the killer whale. Then in 1965, a fateful chain of events began in Namu, a tiny Canadian fishing port in British Columbia. Ted Griffin first came here 25 years ago. He came in response to reports of a captured killer whale trapped in a rocky cove near Namu. Accidentally snared in a fisherman's net, a 4-ton bull killer whale was offered for sale. For showmen and scientists alike, this was the prize of prizes. Only a few had ever been taken alive, and none survived in captivity. But the problem was how to move the huge animal. Ultimately, only Ted Griffin, an upstart young aquarium owner from Seattle, was ready to take on the whale. He had to pay for it in cash, $8,000 that would bond him forever to the killer whale he named Namu.
How will you be bringing him down? What happens to your $8,000 if you lose the whale?
If the whale dies or gets away, we're out $8,000 plus an additional $2,000 to $3,000 we've already spent in securing it. And I would imagine that before this journey is over, we'll have an expense in something in excess of $30,000.
Small whales and dolphins had been captured before, but this was another matter. Griffin's aquarium in Seattle was 450 miles away. On the dock at Namu, Griffin started building a unique floating pen for the whale. Only 29, Griffin was bursting with energy and confidence. Local residents ridiculed his whale cage, but by the time it was finished, they all rallied to help him. Amazingly, Namu accepted his new home. He swam along inside the pen as a strange voyage began. Even now, it seemed clear that Namu was not dangerous to humans. He was gentle and curious. Before long, he and Ted Griffin became friends. The story of the captured whale and his young owner was a sensation by the time they reached Seattle. On his arrival, thousands of people turned out to see Namu. It was the biggest thing ever to hit Griffin's small-time aquarium.
When you say Namu, right hand. Namu. Namu. Hey, that sounds like go all right.
Gotta kill a whale in tow.
I guess it was bound to happen. There was bound to be a song written about Namu the whale, and a rock and roll song at that.
Take it, Namu. Yeah.
A few weeks before, no one knew or cared much about killer whales. Now a kind of Namu madness swept the Northwest.
Namu the killer whale.
As a child, Ted Griffin had dreamed of owning a pet whale and becoming a popular hero. Now it was all happening, thanks to Namu.
I, at the time, had always wanted to state that the killer whale was really friendly to man, and that there was no serious reason to continue their fear of the whale. There's been a lot of fear of the killer whale. So, in order to get people to identify with the whale, I tried to make him human. I tried to make the people see the whale as a friendly companion.
Namu soon astonished the world with his good nature, intelligence, and charm. The largest species of dolphin, killer whales seem to thrive on plenty of attention and fresh fish served daily. But people were still scared of the whale. One of Griffin's favorite stunts was to stage an accident while feeding Namu. Horrified onlookers were still gasping when it became clear that Ted and Namu were putting them on. Griffin was the first man to swim with a killer whale, a daring act that led to total trust and acceptance. A popular movie was made starring Namu, and millions got their first close-up look at a killer whale. Now, anything seemed possible.
The whale, as we say, was paying his way. But here's the whale eating well and performing well, and the attendance at the aquarium is very good. The people are lined up, and the money is stacked so high that it tips over, and I just love it.
After a few months, Griffin captured a companion for Namu. This was a 2-year-old female, Shamu. He hoped that someday the two would mate. But Shamu was rough and hard to handle. Griffin decided to sell her instead. Shamu was shipped off to SeaWorld in San Diego. She was the first killer whale to travel overland and by air. Shamu was out of the water for more than 10 hours, but she would be none the worse for the experience. This was the beginning of a booming market for killer whales and of bitter controversy. Some saw captive whales as helpless victims of human greed. As time went on, protest would mount. But back in Seattle, Ted Griffin rarely questioned his tremendous success with Namu. He was totally engrossed in his life with the whale.
I'm working with Namu every day, and it's love at this point. I mean, I love this whale. And I'm trying to say to myself, how can I maintain that association, want him to be free like I am to swim around, and yet keep him captive? And it's what I call an anomaly. It's something that I can't quite resolve. So if someone comes at me and says, Ted, how can you do it? I don't want to talk to them about it because I can't really give them a good, clear-cut answer.
Then, with no warning, Namu died. He contracted an infection brought on by polluted water in his pen. Many people turned on Ted Griffin. He had wanted Namu to seem like a person, and now that person was dead. It was July 1966. Namu had lived in captivity 11 months.
At the time, I refused to believe that he was dead. It actually got to the point where 3 or 4 months later, there was a fictitious story that came out of Australia that said Namu was secretly living in Australia at some private home or residential place. And when I read that story and I had somebody repeat it to me, I believed it. I wanted it to be true, and so I believed it. And I guess it's in a way of trying to remove whatever responsibility I may have had for the passing of the whale.
Ted Griffin continued to capture and sell killer whales. But eventually he quit the business and all but disappeared. Everything had changed for him because of Namu. Perhaps the first human to own a killer whale, Griffin was the first to realize that the whale owned him too. By 1970, the great killer whale roundup was at its height. Along the northwestern coast of the U.S. and Canada, hundreds were captured and about 50 were kept for research and exhibition. The whales were elusive and powerful, but seldom hurt their captors. Once wrapped in body-enclosing nets, most of them soon calmed down. Although killer whales are found all over the world, it was here in the Pacific Northwest that people first got to know them. Many whales died during capture or soon after. Learning to handle them was mostly a matter of trial and error. These whales fascinated the world. They had huge brains, and the strange sounds they made seemed almost like a language. They stuck close to one another and resisted separation. Clearly, this was no ordinary animal, and people couldn't help wondering if we shouldn't leave them alone. By the mid-70s, capturing killer whales would become politically impossible in the Northwest. Opposition was based on moral grounds, and also the fear that capturing too many whales could endanger the wild population. No one knew how many killer whales there were in local waters. Traditionally, most knowledge of whales came from whalers, but killer whales were never hunted here commercially. So, Mike Bigg, a Canadian government biologist, was on new ground when he began studying killer whales in 1971. Today, Big's office in Nanaimo, British Columbia, is crowded with data on killer whales of the Northwest. For Big, a chance assignment became a lifelong passion. He has exhaustive data on some 300 whales and knows each one almost personally. And this odyssey all began with a single strip of film.
The photo identification work was really quite accidental, and it was really the breakthrough that we needed to understand the lives of these animals. And it was quite by accident we went out and took photographs in the early years of our study, just really because we wanted to take photos of the animals because they were beautiful animals. As soon as we realized that you could identify each individual whale, we were all exhilarated because we now had a window into their lives.
Ordinarily, we only see whales when they surface to breathe. There's just a glimpse of the back and the dorsal fin. But to his delight, Big found identifying marks as good as fingerprints for telling the whales apart. For example, this large male is informally called Top Notch. There's a small indentation on the tip of his fin. A female always seen with Top Notch looks like she's carrying a saddle, so that's what she's called. Another female. Scientifically, she's designated A25, but her nickname is Sharky. So the killer whales could be easily identified and counted.
Granny.
But Big and his colleagues soon realized something more. Killer whales live in family groups called pods. They stay with their mothers all their lives, and these maternal groups never split up for more than a few hours. Big was able to figure out a killer whale family tree, an unprecedented history involving scores of whales stretching back over 80 years. Now, an informed look at a killer whale pod reveals fascinating information. The males have the tallest dorsal fins, up to 5.5 feet. But even the biggest and most powerful bulls stick close to their mothers. The smaller fins belong to immature males and females. A female may live 70 years or more and have 5 children who will never leave her. Each of her calves can be 7 feet long and weigh 400 pounds at birth. In the Northwest, killer whales are mostly seen in coastal waters. They are playful creatures and seem attracted to seaweed forests along the shore. Eight tons of killer whale comes and goes like a graceful phantom underwater. Like most mammals, baby killer whales remain dependent while they nurse and learn the ways of survival. Spy hopping. The calf takes a peek at the world above. And another feat, known as breaching. A calf can only stay down 7 minutes or so. Adults can remain underwater twice that time. But when they're in a curious or exuberant mood, killer whales can make quite an impression. Killer whale pods often get together. Sometimes they briefly form superpods of 100 whales or more. These whales are resting. Their bodies gently touching, they may remain like this for hours, dozing away a summer afternoon. While Big's work continued in Canada, killer whales in adjacent American waters were taken over by Ken Balcom. In his laboratory on San Juan Island, Balcom keeps track of about 80 whales in what is now called the Southern Community. Astonishingly, these southern whales never mix with their northern counterparts. Big and Balcom have found the whales respect a dividing line some 100 miles north of the U.S.-Canadian border. How and why they split up this way remains a mystery. And there is a third group of whales, different enough to be called another race. These are animals with no known territory, so they're called transients. They move fast and quietly in small pods. They are pointed and shark-like in appearance. And they live by hunting other sea mammals. Killer whales do not kill humans. There is only one documented record of an attack in the wild. But they often come close inshore to attack sea lions and harbor seals. Undoubtedly, this kind of killer whale gave the species its name and fearsome reputation. These remarkable pictures were taken by researchers who watched in amazement as a panicked seal boarded a boat to get away from transient killer whales. Temporarily, the seal's fear of man meant nothing. The mysterious transient killer whales pose fascinating questions. How do they relate to the resident fish-eating whales of the Northwest? Which are typical of the species and which the exception? So far, no one knows. A lonely beach in Argentina is famous because sea lions breed here, and local killer whales come each year to hunt them. The sea lion pups are guarded by their mothers, but when the mother must leave to find food, the pups are vulnerable. The whales will take any sea lion they can, but the adults usually escape. A pup is seized. But the killer whale's playful nature extends even to hunting. The bewildered pups become mere tokens in brutal killer whale games. The pups rarely escape in the end. These rituals may help teach young killers how to hunt, but that's no solace for a frantic sea lion mother. Vancouver's Public Aquarium, an old and highly respected exhibitor of killer whales.
That sounds like a good plan.
John Ford is a field researcher and curator of marine mammals here.
Is that right? But what about I-12? That was a red herring? Yeah. That's great. Did you manage to get some shots?
Hyak, a 6-ton male, is a beloved local character in Vancouver. especially since he's taken an interest in books. Quite by accident, Ford discovered that Hayek is fascinated by pictures of killer whales.
I think that he is relating to the very distinctive black and white pattern of the killer whale. If we try showing him pictures of other animals like a dog or a cat, he's really not interested. He'll just drift away and go and do other things. But if it's a killer whale, he is definitely curious about it.
Vancouver Aquarium's education program allows children to sleep overnight in the company of killer whales. It's part of an effort to stimulate their interest in the environment, and in every way, it provides a great awakening. Something remarkable often happens between people and killer whales. For scientists and laymen alike, there's an exciting sense that this relationship could go far. And this feeling has been reinforced by continuing research with killer whales in the wild. Johnstone Strait, a narrow waterway separating Vancouver Island from the Canadian mainland. This is where John Ford first recorded killer whale sounds in 1976. Searching for whales, Ford lowers an underwater microphone. He can hear killer whales up to 10 miles away. Killer whales make rapid, pulsing noises, which they use to see underwater by echolocation. But they also make a variety of other sounds, which Ford can partly decipher.
Yeah, I can hear some faint calls here. It sounds like A30s.
Ford has made a stunning discovery, that each killer whale pod uses a different sound dialect. The pods can identify each other by sound alone. This is the call of our pod, about 20 whales in the northern community. And this is X-Pod, 5 transients. They often call just after making a kill. And A5 Pod, the dialect of Top-Notch, Saddle, and Sharkey. Dialects tell a lot about a whale. The A5 dialect is still used by Hayek, although it's been 20 years since he was taken from the wild. And the study of dialects indicates how pods are related, kinships that date back hundreds of years. Killer whale calls may have other meanings beyond identification. From his isolated laboratory on Johnstone Strait, psychologist Paul Spong is conducting a long-term study of killer whale calls.
Hi.
Listening for whales around the clock, Spong and his partner, Helena Simons, detect an approaching pod. Their widespread array of hydrophones monitors a large area, about 20 square miles. Spong can spot many pods as they first enter the Johnstone Strait area. The whales come here to feed on salmon and to observe social traditions we don't fully understand. In summer, there are new visitors almost every day. The whales pass from one hydrophone station to the next. but often they remain silent. Finally, at a place called Craycroft Point, they almost always start calling, as if announcing their arrival in the strait. Spong follows a pod of whales to Craycroft Point, hoping to demonstrate this remarkable ritual. 25 out of the last 26 arriving pods have called out here, but this one keeps Spong and Simons in suspense.
Hey, they turn.
Get that stuff.
The call, as expected. It's a small but gratifying landmark in Spong and Simons' research. A few miles south of Craycroft Point, there's another spot that seems to have a special meaning for killer whales. It's called Rubbing Beach. Frequently, whales come close to shore here, almost stranding on the gravel bottom. For years, no one was quite sure what they were doing. Here, Robin and Alexandra Morton met for the first time. They soon married and dedicated their young family to killer whale research. To start with, Robin, a filmmaker, made the first underwater movies of the whales at Rubbing Beach. Morton's films revealed a fantastic sight. Tons of killer whales at play like happy puppies. They seemed almost magically attracted to the smooth pebbles here. This may rid them of parasites, and certainly it can soothe an itch. Later movies documented the rubbing behavior more fully. But still, no one can say why they prefer this one spot for their joyful underwater ballet. Praised for his pioneering work at Rubbing Beach, Robin Morton became engrossed in filming whales. But sometimes he couldn't resist a snapshot of Alexandra and their son Jarrett. Together in the field, these three were a team. Then, in September 1986, Robin Morton died at Rubbing Beach. His diving gear failed and he drowned, only 100 yards from the spot where he and Alexandra first met. She knew something was wrong only when the whales became alarmed. Today, Alexandra Morton still lives in British Columbia, near Johnstone Strait. Continuing the work that first brought her here, she seeks to understand the relationship between killer whales' sounds and their behavior. This may never be completely understood. But as with much killer whale research, the work is an end in itself.
I love my time with the whales. There's something about them, whether it's the size or the beauty or the mysteriousness. I really don't know what it is, but they are very attractive. And I often find when I'm surrounded by them that I wish I was a part of their society. They always look like they're having a good time, and I get such a sense of family about them. You see the mothers and the babies and the teenagers and the adult males, and the families all stay together. And I find that very attractive about them personally.
Not too long ago, men hunted whales in the Pacific Northwest. We sought killer whales for exhibition and other species for their meat and oil. Even today, the hunt goes on. But the goal is to admire whales, not slaughter or corral them. Whale watching is a $5 million industry in the Northwest. It's so popular that some fear the whales will be crowded out. So, to protect the whales in Johnstone Strait, there are now scientists who watch whale watchers watching whales. But most people see killer whales in more dramatic circumstances. Performing killer whales have been called ambassadors for their species. And in the hearts and minds of many, this is where protecting the environment begins. Marine World Africa USA in Vallejo, California, has two killer whales, Yaka and Viga. In summer, they do up to 5 shows a day.
Come on, Yak. Come on.
Head trainer Sonny Allen has worked with Yaka for 20 years. No one has lived longer with or closer to a killer whale.
You a good girl? Huh? You a good girl? Yeah. Okay, where's Vicky? What'd you do? Shut Vicky out? Huh? Come here.
Killer whales are the top attraction in every oceanarium that has them. There are only about 45 in captivity,
What are you two going to do?
and each is worth around $1 million.
Spit on me. You gonna spit
So
on me?
much depends on how whales and trainers get along.
You out there. I look at them as kids from around 7 to about 10 years old. They're always trying and seeing what they can get away with and what they can't get away with. So you have to be pretty much on your toes as a cetacean parent, if you will, and not so much a trainer. What? Where'd you go? Where'd you go? Huh? What's this? What? Is that mine? Huh? Oh, that's your second favorite, ain't it? All right, give me a real good one.
A blowhole inspection, part of Yaka's weekly physical exam, conducted with veterinarian Laurie Gage.
Come on right back. Okay, now that's not bad there.
Okay.
I think we'll roll her over and check her ventral side.
On cue, Yaka rolls over and holds her breath.
Yeah, she likes that.
It's an amazing demonstration of trust. In this vulnerable position, she can't see what's going on.
She looks good underneath. It's really good. She relaxed down there?
Yes, she seems to be.
Okay. I want
To signal Yaka to raise her body, Laurie only has to give the water a gentle pat.
Yeah, a little lighter. There you go.
There, here she
There
comes.
she comes.
Need just to have
There
her
you go.
just
Good.
underwater is perfect.
Killer whales almost always look healthy, but they can sicken and die in just a few days. Routine blood tests are a wise precaution.
Bingo. Paul, I'm gonna let you do the bridging. She's perfect right there. Good girl.
Performing whales like Yaka are popular but controversial. They're both a joy and a headache for oceanarium directors like Mike Demetrius.
The public really didn't know very much about these animals. In fact, they were shooting them in Puget Sound. They were dive bombing them up in Iceland as little as 25 years ago. And now, because of what the oceanariums have done by educating people about what magnificent creatures they are, now it seems to have turned on us, and now people seem to think that they shouldn't be in captivity.
Are killer whales too smart and sensitive to be held captive? Do they suffer when separated from their pods and become demented in confinement? Although man exploits many other animals, captive killer whales rouse deep emotions. Psychologist Paul Spong is one of the best-known opponents of captivity.
I think that what they're displaying in these tanks is a caricature of the real animal. It's almost a shadow when you consider what the orca is like in the ocean, and it leads such an intimate, joyous life with its family, and then you watch this poor animal performing these circus tricks in these tanks, and I'm sorry, you have to shake your head and walk away from it.
John Ford looks after the 3 killer whales at Vancouver Aquarium.
I think that it's very important for people to be exposed to the living animal, especially children. It makes an emotional bond that is unobtainable in other ways. And once a person has seen a killer whale, it may affect the way that they think about killer whales in the future, and other whales, and perhaps the environment generally.
Although his work has inspired sentiment against captivity, Mike Bigg believes it is acceptable.
It's really only in a captive situation that you can appreciate just how magnificent they are. We see them as much as anybody in the wild, but we're still only a fleeting glimpse of them. And when I go to an aquarium and I see them up close, I realize just how big and strong and beautiful they are.
Alexandra Morton has studied captive whales and members of the same pod in the wild.
The oceanariums want them in captivity for the draw. It comes down to dollars and cents. A killer whale is very expensive to keep in captivity, and they cost a great deal to capture. And so the only reason that the oceanarium would go through that expense is for the terrific draw that whales have. And I agree, you know, people have seen whales in captivity, and I'm sure that it has changed them and made them feel more personally towards whales. But I don't think that justifies it any longer.
Perhaps the most famous pair of captive killer whales were Orky and Corky, who lived for 20 years at Marineland in California. In 1977, Corky had a calf, the first killer whale to be conceived and born in captivity. There was great celebration. The future supply of captive whales seemed assured, and the successful birth was seen as proof that captive whales were healthy and happy.
Hey, here's to the next baby.
But the calf was brain damaged and soon died. Corky, the mother whale, had 4 more calves, but none of them survived. Corky's last calf, born in 1986, failed to nurse. So every 6 hours around the clock, Marineland employees hand-fed the baby. Their efforts were in vain. No one theory accounts for all the deaths, but Marineland's small tank was part of the problem. The baby couldn't be isolated with its mother, and Corky may not have been able to nurse properly in such close quarters. Each death at Marineland raised new doubts about the health of captive whales and their future in oceanariums. Then, in 1984, SeaWorld of Florida opened a huge new tank. Here there was room for up to half a dozen whales and for dramatic new shows. Today, almost all captive killer whales in the U.S. belong to SeaWorld. They are the mainstay of a business worth more than $1 billion. No other oceanarium does such spectacular stunts. And there have been problems. Several trainers have been injured in accidents. And for the first time on record, a whale died after a fight at SeaWorld San Diego. The social environment of the big tanks may be in part responsible. But here, too, life has been created. Beginning in 1985, there have been 5 successful killer whale births at SeaWorld. The babies came just in time. SeaWorld had been unable to obtain whales directly from the wild since the late 1970s. So, new pods of killer whales are being created. They will roam artificial oceans in Florida, in Texas, and in California. Like colonists in space, they will become new creatures in a strange new environment. As for the rest, far-flung and mysterious, they are only as safe as the air they breathe and the oceans they roam. In the long run, if we are to save the whales, we must save their world and our own.